Leader Xi Jinping's virtual meeting this week, a panel of security and economic experts recommending the U.S. start aggressively dialing back commercial ties with China. This, as a report says, China's embassy in Washington is pushing executives and companies to fight against China-related bills and urging members of Congress to drop bills that enhance the United States' competitiveness. Pretty much Beijing bullying business to try to get pro-China policy. Joining me right now is Stevens Incorporated Executive Vice President. She is Senior Policy Advisor Mary Kissel. She is the former advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mary, it's great to see you again. Welcome.
It's great to be back on the program, Maria. Thanks for having me.
So, Mary, you were Secretary Pompeo's right hand. We know that during his time in the State Department. So I want to get your take on foreign policy. First, assess for us what's going on between the U.S. and China. Nothing really came out of that call between President Biden and President Xi Jinping. What are your thoughts on where we are today and how it affects business, Mary?
Well, I think that there was a lot of enthusiasm for the Biden team when they came in, hoping that they would continue the tough policy and maintain the leverage that the Trump administration had given them vis-a-vis our China policy. But what we saw over time is the first thing they did is they stopped saying things like General Secretary Xi Jinping in communist China. They softened the rhetoric. Then they started to have high-level meetings between U.S. officials and Chinese officials while getting really nothing in return. And we've seen these meetings almost every month from the trade rep, the commerce secretary, the Secretary of State, the national security advisor. And it all culminated in this call between the president and the general secretary. And I think what it adds up to, Maria, is dialogue without leverage. And it's dialogue for dialogue's sake. It's replaying the same policy that we had 10, 20 years ago with China. It doesn't recognize the reality of the threat that we face. And we know that if you come to the table with Beijing without any real threat of consequence for their bad behavior, you're going to lose that negotiation.
Yeah, and not only that, but you would think that this administration has all the leverage it needs. I mean, after all, the CCP used 2020 as an opportunity to invade and gain more land, invading India, killing soldiers there, invading Hong Kong, throwing freedom fighters like Jimmy Lai in prison. You've got disappearance of executives, the status of Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai now up in the air. The Women's Tennis Association is worried. Peng accused a retired senior Chinese official of sexual assault, and since doing so, she's been disappeared from public view. No, we don't know. She didn't have a footprint online. The Chinese state broadcaster did post on Twitter yesterday a screenshot of an email Peng allegedly sent to the WTA where she said the sexual assault allegations were not true. She says, quote, "I'm not missing, nor am I unsafe. I've just been resting at home. Everything is fine." Yeah, right. We haven't seen her. The WTA doubts the email is really from Peng. So, Mary, you are an expert in business as well. I want you to talk to us about what American businesses need to understand about operating in China, given the fact that the CCP is now giving out all these honeypots to companies like J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and all the rest who are going to be able to own 100% of their businesses there.
Well, a couple things to say here, Maria. First is that it's a feature, not a bug, of every communist system that's ever existed that they place no value on human life. Secondly, everything that they say is usually the opposite. So when they say everything is fine with that tennis player, no, not everything is fine. In fact, exactly the opposite is true. Now, when it comes to doing business in China, I just want to go back to where you started the segment with that letter that the Chinese embassy has sent to certain business leaders. This is a clear meddling in our domestic affairs, and it shows you the kind of arrogance that Beijing has, that they can exert that kind of influence over our C-suites. And this is not just a one-off, Maria. We've seen a pattern of this behavior. Recall back in early 2020, the consulate in New York sent a state legislator in Wisconsin a letter saying, don't support Taiwan. We've also seen instances where Chinese diplomats have gone to governors and said, say this, or we're going to withdraw investment from your state. So you've got a lot of risk layers here, Maria. You have physical risk to your people because they don't value human life. You have financial risk because there is no rule of law. You have reputational risk because you're doing business in a place that's essentially a party state. So you can't just because you're not doing business in Xinjiang doesn't mean that you're not supporting the Chinese Communist Party, because you are. It's a party state. So you have multi-layered risks here, and then you add on top of that an administration that is not exerting any kind of real pressure on the regime. I will say this, though, for the Biden team, they have expanded the Quad. That's good. You want to reach out to allies in the region. They are starting to cooperate with allies like Australia on things like rare earth production. They seem to be aware of the threat that we need to onshore semiconductor manufacturing. That's very, very good. But if you're sitting in New York and you're thinking, well, I'm going to go in because I have a great relationship in Beijing, well, I'd re-examine that assumption.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how Nike doesn't get it, how the NBA doesn't get it. Enes Kanter had the moral courage to come out and call it out. But, we'll have to watch how this plays out, as so far American business has dollar signs in their eyes. They want to sell to 1.4 billion people, and they're ignoring all of this. Real quick before you go, Mary, Russia, Vladimir Putin again building up troops and military forces near the border with Ukraine. Is there trouble to come here? Your thoughts?
Well, Putin, first of all, is very opportunistic. So when you see the EU, having economic difficulties, fighting amongst themselves, you have a Britain that's distracted. You have a United States with an inflation problem and a weak foreign policy. That's typically when he tends to pounce. And also, it's true that he loves to create problems, which he then pretends to solve, like he did in Syria.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. Mary, good to see you.